I'm going to just say this. Your frustration and your anger is very righteous. And I always tell people anger is not a sin at all. Mm-mm. And your anger and your frustration.
I'm okay with my anger.
But I'm just telling you, it's
Even
dope and it's necessary and it's right. And I get frustrated too because we want progress to be quicker. We want people to acknowledge the pain. We want people to acknowledge the sacrifice that people have made so that we could have this progress, and to watch us take 2 steps forward and then them really make us take, 1 3/4 steps back.
Looking for the ultimate conversation on Black innovation and wealth creation?
Look no further. From Chains to Links brings together some of the top Black entrepreneurs, academics, creatives, and futurists
to discuss how we reimagine Black community
and build a collective vision for true Black prosperity.
So get ready. We're about to go there. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to From Chains to Links, the podcast that really has the hard conversations about what we as a Black people need to do in order to advance. I am Kelly Burton, and I am here with my co-host, Ife EK. And we are joined today by a brother who really doesn't need an introduction. Y'all know this brother. Y'all see him on TV, on CNN, on MSNBC, not Fox though. Fox too? Not Fox. No. Okay, not Fox. You're a former politician.
Right.
You're an author.
Yes, ma'am.
And you be out in these streets telling the truth.
I try.
Bakari Sellers, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for coming.
So, we are in an interesting time. First of all, we're in D.C. We are, this is the week of CBC's ALC, their big conference that they have every year.
AKA the Black Super Bowl.
AKA the Black Super Bowl. So thank you for, taking a moment to meet with us because there's a whole lot going on. But, From Chains to Links, we like to start with one question to kind of ground the conversation. I want to know, where are your people from? Where are your people from?
Oh, that's a good question. That's how we start. That's how we start most of our conversations in South Carolina and down south. I don't know where y'all are from, but I'm from the big city of Denmark, South Carolina. We have 3 stoplights and a blinking light.
Oh, wow.
And my mom is from Funky Town. She's from Orange Mound in Memphis, Tennessee. And my dad is from Denmark, South Carolina. And so those are where my roots come from. And we can trace them all the way back to West Africa. In the Sierra Leone portion of the continent, and so that's where my people are from. Where y'all from?
North Philadelphia.
Some Jersey girls.
Y'all are not from Philadelphia, New Jersey.
Yeah, we were.
No Black people are from Philadelphia and New Jersey. So where are your grandparents from?
No, my people are from Nigeria.
Okay, that's fair. Where are your grandparents
South
from?
Carolina.
Exactly. So y'all ain't from Philadelphia.
Yeah, but
It's both and.
Y'all just want to act like y'all from a city.
I mean, but yes, you're right. I am a Jersey girl, but I'm from South Jersey. So across the river is Philly, and all my people are from Philly.
No, they're not. Your people are from South Carolina. Stop trying to claim a big city.
Well,
you're from the dirt of South Carolina.
I don't know nothing about that though. I don't know nothing about no South Carolina. I mean, this is what I'm told.
You sound like
this is what I'm.
That's how we gonna be from Chains to Links, and you ain't going back home.
Yeah, that's a good. Well, if you made this point yesterday, where everybody giving Ancestry.com all their data, now I never gave Ancestry.com.
I'm not doing that now.
Well, how you know your folks go back to Sierra Leone?
My dad was a director of African American studies. You don't need Ancestry.com to figure out where you're from.
You just gotta go into the archives. It takes a lot of work.
It does take work.
Yeah, like that show, Find Your Roots on PBS.
Yeah, what's his name?
Henry Louis.
Yeah, Henry Louis Gage. Yeah.
I just gotta get famous enough to be able to get on that.
Well,
show.
you can just call him up.
I call him up, and he'll meet me there, and we'll walk through my ancestry.
Mm-hmm. You might find out.
Oh, that's
that's pretty dope.
That'd be dope.
You can do AfricanAncestry.com.
They still get your stuff.
I was about to say,
I know,
so
but
they
I
don't keep your data.
I don't think they use your data. At least they didn't before. Now it may be.
Okay, so here's a slightly nuanced question. When did you know you were Black in America?
September 18th, 1984.
What happened on September 18th, 1984?
I was born.
Oh, my God.
He always knew he was Black
in America.
Y'all got some more difficult questions? Are we done? Is this it? Are these the questions?
Was in the ICU unit like, I need another blanket. Why is
this was a good conversation.
What? Nobody has ever said their birthday.
There was no revelation. There was no aha.
There was no build-up. There was no
I think that's actually geographically and culturally what's different of being from the South. Because Black folk in other parts of the country have this realization or this aha moment that you're Black. But when you're from the South, you're born into it. I mean, like, for example, we don't have to read history books to learn about the civil rights movement, because all we do is go to the barbershops or go to our churches, and you have individuals who smelled gun smoke, who laid on jailhouse floors, who everybody has a community. When we go get our hair cut, there's always an old guy that can tell you about the time that King came to town, and we talk about LeBron versus Michael, they talk about King versus Malcolm. And so these are real discussions we have in our community of people who fought for the movement because the injustices were so rich throughout the South. And so, yeah, it's not a realization or an aha moment. You're born into it.
So that kind of flows into this conversation that we want to have today about the modern day civil rights movement.
Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, I will. So as you're talking, that's so wild. Like, I think you stole our cards. But as you're talking about this deep connection with movements, in many ways, it's kind of annoying to hear people say post-George Floyd. Annoying because it almost, for the large majority of America, almost paints like that was like the first awakening, if you will, that many have had. And for many, that probably may have been the case. But obviously movements are not a new phenomenon when you're Black in America. And so just wanted to you've kind of already touched on it, but when you think about the significance of movements over time, why is it that they matter? And that may seem like a very obvious question, but I have a slightly different way of looking at it as to like, why do we need so many? Like, it almost feels like there's so many movements. I mean, you heard we.
Well, I mean, the we is important to framing the question, because are you talking about the plight of African Americans in this country? Are you talking about the plight of women in this country? I mean, they're integrated at certain aspects, but I dare not say that my struggles are the same as yours. And I would argue that your struggles as a Black woman in this country are far greater than mine.
That's the end of our program, and we thank you all for being here. This is actually the point of this whole thing. Sorry, this has never happened in a space with a Black person.
But movement, first of all, after I have this argument back and forth a lot with my editor. I just finished my third book.
Congrats.
Thank you. And after you go through an nadir or a very dark point, usually, and King said it best, he said, only when it's darkest can you see the stars. And so for a lot of people, George Floyd was emblematic of so much because of the time period that we were in. I was with Felonious yesterday, George's brother. We flew in from Houston together to DC. And George Floyd, and it's a unique conversation to have because I don't think people analyze George Floyd in the correct manner. Why was George Floyd, or why was that such a powerful moment in our history? And I would argue that there were a few things. One, George Floyd would not have been as powerful if we were not in a pandemic. The fact that we were in a pandemic, everybody was home and they had to repeatedly watch that video over and over and over again, made people want to react and feel some type of way. And two, it took an entire globe coming outside for there to be any accountability for Black folk. And there's a difference between justice and accountability. Justice is George Floyd being at Thanksgiving this year. Accountability is his officers going to prison. And so you have to be clear about the language. But there is a natural line between George Floyd and Emmett Till and Medgar Evers. And I think there's a natural progression. Your question is cool, but I don't think your question is the right one.
Well, somebody changed these questions on the card, Bakari.
I'm about to give you the right question to ask. I got you. But the question has to be, like, why does progress in this country cost Black people so much? Because I would argue every ounce of progress we've ever had in this country is because of Black blood that flowed through the streets. Mm-hmm. And people watching, they'll be like, so what do you, give me an example? And I say, well, you wouldn't have the Voting Rights Act and Civil Rights Act if you didn't have the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And the Edmund Pettus Bridge was a classic example because it was the first time that white people in America were able to see brutality against black folk because it actually aired on nightly news, right? You wouldn't have the Fair Housing Act of 1968 but for the assassination of King. We wouldn't even be talking about criminal justice reform but for George Floyd. And so I think the question, instead of asking about movements, one of the challenges of our generation is lowering the price for change in this country. Because right now it's very costly for us.
So lowering the price for black people. Yeah. Agreed. And I'll take it one step further. The Immigration Act, that was part of the civil rights legislation of the 1960s, that is essentially what has brownified our country. Because prior to that, there were quotas on anybody coming into this country outside of Western Europe. So 100% absolutely. So how do we get there? To a place where the evolution of our democracy does not require the blood of black people flowing
I
in the
don't know
streets.
the answer to that.
No.
I mean, if I knew
I'm like, what we got to do? Because that's what we're trying to figure out. Like,
But I don't know the answer to that question.
is it possible?
You would, that's called hope.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you want to live in I have children. They'll be 5 in January. You want them to live in a country where they don't have to go through despair to have change. And I don't know if that's possible, but that's why you have hope.
Well, is part of it helping to shift the narrative? Because what you just said, I don't think most white people and others appreciate about the role that black people have played in advancing democracy in this country. Because when they come through the door,
Well, that's a harsh generalization. Now, I don't think white people need an advocate in this conversation. But for example, I was giving a speech yesterday, and my brain just took me there. I wasn't intentionally going there, but I ended up talking about coalition building in the middle of my stream of consciousness as I was speaking, and was talking about Goodman, Schwerner, and Cheney. And so we have to acknowledge, and one of the things that we have to realize, I guess, as we're going through and we're talking through the answers to that question that you asked of how do we get there. I mean, I think it takes coalition building. I think it takes, we can't do this by ourselves.
Yeah.
I'll also tell people that racism in this country, which is not necessarily what we're talking about, but racism in this country is not on us to fix.
But it always is on us to fix.
No, it's not. I got a lot of burdens to bear.
Yeah, but
I fuck up a lot.
Yeah.
And I have a lot to fix.
Yes.
But that ain't one of the things I have to fix.
But we say that in a moment where at Black Innovation Alliance, we just launched this campaign called the Clapback, which is in response to all of this misinformation that is being hurled out into the public space. And who is it falling to in order to right this conversation? Black people. So while I would aspire to a world where that didn't fall to us to fix, that's not the current reality. Yes, I would love to get to a place where Black people did not carry the burden of it. But my whole job is dedicated to carrying it. Ify's whole job is dedicated to carrying the burden of it. So, and I agree. Like, I agree that white people have an untold story as their role in advancing the cause for justice. But it's like those narratives aren't making into the public space either. So
correct. Nobody talks about Miami University of Ohio and their role in the civil rights movement and how they trained civil rights workers before they went down to Freedom Summer.
Or the fact that white people created the NAACP and they fund the NAACP and the United Negro
we don't have
on
to go.
HBCUs.
But the totality of the story has to be told. I think is the message that we're sharing today.
I'm with that. Let's tell it.
Yeah, and I don't think that when you were talking about cheapening, so I agree with Kelly. I agree with both of you that I don't think that it is for us to fix racism. I do think in the spirit of this conversation around movements, I do think there has been a cheapening though as to how we have been both forced to be positioned, but also at times been very effective at responding to racism. And to Kelly's point, it has for some people turned into their life's work. Like, I don't think we've valued, it's almost like, I'm going to go on a little tangent. We are so used to seeing 5-year-old kids that can sound like Whitney Houston that we just be, hold on, let me finish. No. Our response to it is like, oh, Jaquinta do that all the time without actually being like, wow, that is a gift, that's a craft, that's an art. And I think that with movements, there is what happens, what unfortunately happens, and maybe I'm a little sensitive as somebody that has been like both behind the scenes and on the ground, is that there is this expectation, and maybe we can talk about the expectation of how we respond to movements, but there is this expectation that we're going to be at the front line of being on the ground. What I think gets minimized is the strategy behind movements and what it takes to actually build a movement. Not something that we wanted to do, but something that we had to do. And I don't think that that's just external. I think internal, whether it's the combination of us grieving collectively and not having the bandwidth to honor each other's genius, or maybe at times we just take it for granted that we're just really good at responding to racism. Whichever one it is, or a combination of the two, I do think that there is something about whether it's our responsibility or not, there is something about the excellence by which we, unfortunately, in a capitalist society, have been able to move people outside of our community to do something, and that's different than having a cause or a nonprofit.
So no, I hear you. I don't disagree with anything either one of you all have said. I would just ask you to consider, when we talk about racism, I think a lot of the things that we do around racism, and when I say that it's not our burden to bear, I stand on that. I think we do a lot of things to help alleviate the symptoms thereof. I think that is the work that we're talking about. The symptoms of racism, the tentacles of racism, how it affects our daily lives, the structures that it finds itself meandering through. But if you're going to take out the cancer, what I'm telling you about that cancer is that that's not something that we can do, because we don't cause that.
Agreed.
And so that's my only point.
Yeah.
We're talking about taking a scalpel to that cancer that is racism, that's not something we can do, because we're not the cause thereof.
So then what is our role?
With what?
And the reason, and I'm asking this in a way that you said you have 5-year-old children.
4.5, yeah.
4.5. So who are you trusting then to actually take out that cancer? Who is equipped to do that work so that their future actually looks different? Because I would argue that cancerous spaces are probably likely not well enough to do that on their own.
Well, then we have a struggle. Because
Right.
I can't imagine, and I don't know anyone throughout our history per se who was dedicated to, King talked about changing hearts and minds, etc. But let me give you just a very clear example. People want the political spectrum and dialogue to change in this country. And I say that if white male evangelicals don't stand up, then it never will change, right? If they don't push back against the racism and the bigotry, because they are a very large block of voters and powerful, influential people in this country where that type of hate and bigotry is coddled and they cater towards that, right? And so if we want racism to be alleviated in this country, and we want to have a country that's free and systems that are free from that, it's very, very difficult for me to say that the three of us can go out and do that change. And I don't think that we should have heart attacks and get our sugar high and everything else
Hell no.
trying to conquer that task that is not ours. That's just I think that there are a lot of things we can do in terms of the systemic troubles that we have and a lot of the systemic ills that we have and chipping away at it. But to get to the root of it, people in this country are going to have to begin to give individuals who look like the three of us the benefit of their humanity. And until that happens, we won't change.
So let me ask you this. Do we need a modern day civil rights movement?
We're in one. The civil rights movement never ended. I don't know why people think it ended. The iterations look different. I mean, look at activism in sports, for example, right? I mean, you had the picture. It was Jim Brown, it was Muhammad Ali, it was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and I can't remember the fourth person that was sitting there. But you go back to an era where you had John Carlos, Tommy Smith, 1968, holding fist up. You had, Muhammad Ali. You had Jim Brown. You had Kareem. You had all of these individuals, right, who were on the front lines of that struggle. Mm-hmm. Then you went through this era of Jordan and Charles Barkley and Magic Johnson. Mm-hmm. And people like to say, oh, well, they didn't care about the movement and those type things. Well, that's not correct. The movement just changed the way it looked, because without them, you wouldn't be able to have a LeBron James and Steph Curry and all these other people taking on Wall Street, growing their economic portfolio. Those individuals allowed for that to happen. So the movement just looks different today, but it's never ended. It evolves and it adapts.
When you say that, that makes me think of an evolution of the Black experience, but I don't necessarily know if I would characterize it as the evolution of movement. And maybe the two are intertwined in ways that you just can't untangle.
And there's like some shout out to some of my friends at this place called Movement Net Lab. I think it's interesting, as you were talking, there is this theory in the sense that like movements don't die, but they can be like frazzled. And it's almost like there's the communal movement, but then there's like the individual movement, right? That the sense is that when people go back to their homes from the streets, they don't necessarily fully like put down the movement, that they're carrying parts of that movement wherever they're at. But then there is this triggering effect, if you will, that then kind of gets everyone back into formation, if you will. And I'm wondering if that is to the point again of like cheapening or credit. I don't know then if we need to kind of infuse a different narrative around the different events and or different circumstances that have shifted. And I love looking at sports movements. I would say that there definitely was shifts in like Reaganism and capitalism and corporatism, if you will, that changed how access and even within Black communities, our focus on Black economics and ownership and all of those things were kind of like at the forefront. I don't know if we've necessarily owned those things as like part of the movement in the ways that
they
maybe we should, right?
Yeah, we can't leave them on the...
And I think that's where some friction, if we're going to be honest, today there is kind of this sense of like, for those that believe in Black capitalism, quote unquote, versus movement, in ways that maybe it's a little bit more gray. Like maybe
I think that's a silly thing, though.
Is it silly?
Is it silly? I think the
all
verses.
these people are silly.
I think the verses is. I think the verses is silly. I mean, I don't understand why we have the dichotomy.
I understand it. Because I do understand it.
So explain it to me then. Like I'm 5, because I probably will agree with you, but just the words, I don't follow.
And is the verses capitalism versus what's the other verse?
Versus movement.
I think there is the thought that subscribing to capitalism without understanding that it is already inherently, even though we don't call it racialized capitalism, that racialized capitalism basically implies a certain participation in the current system without taking on the current system and really calling out the ways that it is not only built to create divides between have and have nots, it is designed to specifically punish Black people and therefore other, communities of color, poor communities. And therefore you're not necessarily like improving a system that is built on our backs.
So what's the alternative? And why would you argue that these individuals are not improving, or at least their intent is to improve?
I think it's not a you thing, but I do think that there are individuals that feel like there is a need to tackle I think we can imagine something differently. I think we don't necessarily have the space for that nuance and that disagreement to happen. And the reason why I'm bringing it here is because the space that Kelly and I are in, this broad space of Black innovation, has a lot of different theories as to how do we move forward as a movement while also being innovators, creative technologists, and entrepreneurs. It's not something that I think people have like a clean line between capitalism and movement as much as, and I don't think it's as like, mean-spirited as like you're not down enough. I don't think that's what it is. But I do think that people are trying to figure out a different ethical model for how we can participate, especially since a lot of the ways that help us to accelerate are these accelerators and are these programs that, sure, you may get one or two Bob Johnson on the other side of it, but it does not actually move the Black GDP within our community. And that's, in some ways, there are people that have a mutual interest in both thriving as an entrepreneur, but also seeing shifts within their community. I would argue that there are systems that were already pre-designed for that not to happen, and that we shouldn't be afraid of the conversation. But I do think that there is a different lane where people do want to participate fully in what capitalism has to offer. And, God bless them. You should know that I do not consider myself a capitalist. I do consider myself a cozy socialist. But that's also to say that I am conflicted with like the ways that I did not create this system. I am in it. I obviously need to make money. I need to live. But I do think that there is a conversation that I think needs to be had in the innovation space as it relates to wealth creation, reducing the wealth gap.
Wealth creation outside of capitalism. So for me, it feels, that's interesting. I would love to explore it too. I would love to see the possibilities of that. I'm not sure they exist. Okay. But I would love to see the possibilities of it. And the versus is what bothers me, because a lot of times we end up in these arguments, not even arguments. This is like a very good, this is a healthy intellectual discussion. Like I'm enriching myself listening to you, and I appreciate that. But I deal with this a lot in the criminal justice system, because a lot of people push back on Black solicitors and Black prosecutors. And they're like, how dare you? Why would you? And I'm like, this is decently asinine. We all understand that the criminal justice system works just like it's supposed to, right? It's not broken. It's working just the right way. But you have those individuals who try to go into that system to reform it. So we should not be building a wall of us versus them or giving them pure hell simply because they're in that system. And so I'm very interested in the theory. I use that as an example. I'm very interested in the theory of this Black capitalism versus movement, because I would argue there's not a versus. And even more importantly, for example, when you had SNCC, my dad was one of the founding members of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. I just was writing about a picture. He was protesting the embassy, and the South African embassy in New York, and got arrested. He got arrested with a young man named Willie Ricks. He got arrested with James Foreman and John Lewis, right? And the people who were there to bail him out weren't activists. They weren't a part of the movement. They just happened to be named Harry Belafonte and Sidney Poitier. They were Black capitalists. They just happened to be actors, but they were Black capitalists. And so I don't understand the segregation thereof. When people got arrested down for protesting Alton Sterling, or when people got arrested in Ferguson, who bonded them out? B&J, right? Nobody would argue that they're not Black capitalists, but they play a role in transforming the movement. Now, they may not be out there in the front lines, and I'm just saying that I think we find more value in the integration, or attempting to integrate them, than building a versus.
And I think that makes sense. I think the struggle that a lot of people feel is that capitalism has been built on the back of Black people.
Undoubtedly.
Understand and appreciate. And we have to operate in that same system that was essentially right. So that's the tension. For me, what I'm most interested in is how do we use the levers of capitalism in order to advance the movement, right? Because if we think about the civil rights movement.
I'm with that question.
And the Montgomery bus boycott, right? The point was to break the back of the bus company so that they would have to change the rules.
Correct.
And that is the lever that I don't think we use enough.
Correct.
So that's what I'm curious about.
Like, but we've done that throughout history. So whether or not it was Briggs v. Elliott, which was the first case in the landmark collection of cases known as Brown versus the Board of Education, they wanted to break a public education system,
Right.
which literally was miseducating and treating our kids separate but equal, right? Or Sarah Mae Fleming versus SCE&G. It was a case that was filed prior to Rosa Parks. That case was about SCE&G was a utility company, and throughout the South, the buses used to be owned by utility companies. But it was to break the back of SCE&G. That actually happened to be successful.
Yeah.
And so you're correct. But I think the only way this works is if we take out the verse.
So the dualism of it is what you're not vibing with.
I'm not.
Yeah.
I can't rock. And until we have an us.
Well,
right?
That's a whole other podcast because I don't know what's the us.
Now everybody ain't gonna be on the bus, and this ain't everybody. And this ain't everybody. The work that we're talking about now, I think.
Yeah, you're talking about a conspiracy.
A conspiracy.
In a good way.
I was like,
no. No. In the pure sense, like from the legal doctrine.
Like she just accused me of a crime.
what it means to like you're talking about people that have equity mindset. Like literally, like that regardless of the position that they're in, they are very clear on the same goal, but they're using their spaces for it.
And that's what I really
that's what you're speaking to.
That's exactly
the frustration I have is, and as you're mentioning these cases, and I used to practice as a civil human rights attorney, I'm sitting here and listening to these cases, and I'm also here like, and yes, I also was on Edmund Pettus Bridge with John Lewis last March before he passed away, recognizing that 4 years prior I was working in judiciary when Shelby v. Holder had happened, and it was reversed. And so to me, I think there is a bit of a frustration. It is that question of, even if we are participating through this space of capitalism, we are seeing this very harsh, I think it's a harsh cycle, especially when you see somebody that should have died with Voting Rights Act intact. And in many ways, this concept of, is our work in vain?
And your frustration.
I'm just saying.
No,
like,
but I'm gonna just say
cycle...
this. I'm gonna just say this. Your frustration and your anger is very righteous. And I always tell people, anger is not a sin at all. And your anger and your frustration.
I'm okay with my anger.
But I'm just telling you, it's dope and it's necessary and it's right. And I get frustrated too because we want progress to be quicker. We want people to acknowledge the pain. We want people to acknowledge the sacrifice that people have made so that we could have this progress, and to watch us take 2 steps forward and then them really make us take, 1 3/4 steps back, I think is disheartening at best. But we still have to do that work, and we still have to remain encouraged. And even during those moments of frustration and anger, which I experience a lot of, I think it's okay to take a break. Right?
Yeah.
To see your therapist.
Amen.
Have a drink with friends.
Shout out to Ashley.
Shout out to Dr. Garcia. Go to Cabo on a girls trip. Where y'all? Everybody went. What's the new place in Mexico? Everybody be going for Instagram.
I don't know
Tulum.
I don't go to that place.
Tulum. You know what I'm saying? But then get back to it.
So, Black folks have this tendency of saying, we are not a monolith. And there are some ways that I wish Black people were a little more monolithic, because all of this individual.
I don't really want all of us, though.
You don't want all of us.
I mean,
everybody
I want
is not
us,
invited.
But I don't really. There's some of us I don't want.
Who is disinvited? Who?
Clarence ain't coming.
Clarence ain't coming. Well, that is.
Clarence don't want to be there.
I
though.
stopped
he
laughing.
don't. That goes.
Facts.
Clarence don't want to be there. I would argue. I would argue the harshest trick that this country ever pulled on Black folk was replacing.
That was
Thurgood
not a
Marshall.
trick. That was a crime.
Call it what you want, but the
crime.
harshest, have you ever seen a 180 in American politics?
It was an assault on all things
It
good.
was an assault on democracy to go from somebody
100%.
as pure and as noble as Thurgood Marshall.
The worst form of affirmative action. The worst form.
I think it's an extension of white supremacy.
Undoubtedly.
Right? Like
indubitably. I don't think undoubtedly is the word. Indubitably.
You knew you couldn't be the first in that regard. But he's the first in a lot of other regards.
Oh my God.
And from, I don't know if all of this is true, but having heard from some of his college,
I gotta hear what you about to say before we have to cut this, because I'm not getting sued with you. This podcast gonna get
true,
sued, but it ain't gonna be with my name.
That's
on
why
it.
I didn't put. That's why I'm trying to be.
And to close.
I'm trying to be.
That defamation suit gonna be. I'm gonna be a witness for him, for Clarence. I was like, I was there, Clarence. I heard her say it. She said it twice. She said it off air and on air.
So,
I am a snitch. I'm going to be, yes, Mr. Officer.
So what is the next right move for those of us?
I'll meet you there.
The next move for
right move for those of us who are invited. Those of us
wait,
who are
wait a minute. Before
yes.
I know we're wrapping up.
Yes.
And he said a lot about Black capitalism.
Yes.
But can you at least like there is something not quite curling. The Jerry curl is not fully Murraying for me in this Black capitalism space that you're speaking of. I'm seeing way more exclusionary. I'm even seeing way more using the movement to advance certain platforms, but not necessarily building within community. I'm talking about intra-community. So as Kelly is asking this question, I would love for a part A and part B around like, what is this next space in Black movement? But I will say that, and I want to be very explicit about this, even as you were talking about Ferguson, my spine went up a little bit because what doesn't get enough credit is that it was literally poor Black and brown kids marching for 300 days plus without the camera being there for people to even care to be on the other side of bail funds that maybe don't get enough press, but actually were started by poor people that put their money together in a space where debtor's court is the #1 crime towards our people. And I feel like that doesn't get enough shine as the Sidney Poitiers or the Harry Belafontes. That's the problem I have with capitalism in this space, is that it is seen as like this savior within the community, as opposed to the community, like the people that have the least leading the movement.
What if I told you I don't disagree with anything that you said?
Fine, but then what do we need to be doing more of?
To both and.
Agreed. So what do we need to be doing more
I
of?
think there's a couple of things about that. One, we have to do a better job. We have to do a better job, and content creators, of sharing our stories. Mm-hmm. We have to control our narrative, right? So that's first and foremost. And I think we have to do a better job of lifting up those individuals with our platforms and sharing those stories and spotlighting those individuals. And I'm saying that both are necessary. The communities, we have to go in. SNCC used to go into communities. They didn't try to change from top down. They went into communities. They took the Quaker philosophy into Philadelphia, Mississippi, and register those people and empower those people on a local level. That is necessary. Those stories aren't told as well. But we also need places like the Black Economic Alliance and all of those individuals who work in Wall Street, who are climbing. And I think the answer is you have to lift as you climb. That's our responsibility. It's not, and it's appreciate is too strong because I don't want you to think I'm responding to you, but I don't appreciate per se exclusionary tactics in movements, because that destroys us.
For sure.
And people want that to happen. And so, yeah, you got some people out here who ain't for us. You got some Black capitalists who only care about themselves, who want 2 Teslas and live in a gated community. And that's
and I don't fault them for
that's
that.
your ministry.
Right.
That's
I don't
do
fault
you.
you for that.
Everybody not going to be down with us. But my
Right.
only point that I'm saying is I think it's a both and I think we're stronger like that, sharing all of those stories.
Yeah. Word up.
I agree with you. And I would love for more people that are in those spaces to hear your words, because I do think the lift as your climb looks way more like charity within our own community than actually like rolling up sleeves and being like, I'm spending 5 years in Wall Street. This is my intention. This is my goal. This is how I support the movement. And it looks way more like, let me contribute to the Jack and Jill. Let me do this for the whatever. Let me do.
Part of it is that we have to teach them. Part of it is the work that you were doing, the work you were talking about in Ferguson, the community building. A lot of these people don't know how to do that. And so when they make it to these C-suites, all they know is like, all right, let me give back to my HBCU. Let me give here.
I think
and a part of it is that we exclude them from these conversations. And some of them don't want to be a part of these conversations. But those who want to be a part of these conversations, we have to welcome them and teach them how to do that movement work. That's why movement versus Black capitalism, I don't rock with the verses. I like the and.
And aggregate them, because I cross the paths of people all the time who are like, tell me what I need to do. They want to be aggregated so that they can activate, right? And we can catalyze that money.
There's a curl.
There's a curl. Take us out. Anything else you on your soapbox about, brother, these days?
No, I just appreciate you too. I mean, it's anytime my good friend Brian asked me to come and I looked it up and I saw 2 dope Black women doing something. If I can be a part of it, I want to help lift as I climb.
I appreciate it. Thank you, brother.
Any election predictions?
No, I stopped. I got out the business of predicting elections when I was up here talking about President Hillary Clinton.
Oh, yeah. Touche. All right.
Thank y'all.
brother.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us for another exciting episode of From Chains to Links. So appreciate Bakari for stopping through. You can find him at BakariSellers.com and check us out again for the next episode. See you then.
Hey, everybody. Hope you loved the episode as much as we did.
Join us at BlackInnovationAlliance.com to continue the conversation. And remember to subscribe, like,
And share the podcast as we continue to build the movement
for true Black prosperity.